The ominous signal. The galaxy was never silent, but on that day silence felt heavier than ever before because deep scanners across the borders of the Galactic Coalition began to detect something vast, moving slowly through the darkness of interstellar space. At first, many believed it to be a drifting asteroid cluster or perhaps a derelict station lost to time. But as the data sharpened, the truth became clear and terrifying. What approached was not natural. It was not alien either, at least not alien to history. The shape was unmistakable to the elder races who still remembered old wars. It was human. It was a warship. Panic spread quickly through the border stations. Officers scrambled to confirm the readings, their voices rising as they compared ancient files with the structure now appearing on their holoscreens. The length of the vessel dwarfed most modern battleships. Its armor was layered with scars that spoke of countless engagements, yet its engines burned with steady defiance as though they had never rested. The Coalition commanders tried to reassure themselves that perhaps it was only a ghost ship, a remnant drifting without crew. But the truth cut through those hopes when the warship adjusted its course deliberately and aimed itself toward settled space. This was no ghost. It was awake in the high chambers of the Coalition Council. Representatives from a dozen species gathered in alarm. They debated with urgency, their voices echoing across marble halls as fear gripped even the proudest of rulers. For centuries, humans had been absent. Their fleets vanished into obscurity after the last Great War. Many had assumed they had perished in their own fires or chosen exile among the stars. Yet here one of their warships came, silent and relentless. The council chambers grew tense as older species shared memories that the younger ones did not believe. They remembered human fleets that burned across star systems with fury unmatched by logic, warriors who fought with a madness that defied reason, commanders who sacrificed everything, yet always seemed to win. The Coalition had survived because humanity disappeared, not because it defeated them. Across border outposts, the soldiers whispered. Stories spread faster than orders. Some said this warship was the legendary Titan of Sol, a dreadnought so powerful that entire fleets had been crushed beneath its guns. Others claimed it was crewed by machines left behind by humanity to watch the galaxy. And there were darker whispers, the kind that crept into minds during long nights. They said humans never truly left. They had only been waiting for the right moment to return. If so, what did they want now? The warship never spoke, never sent a hail or a signal of peace. It only advanced, slow and steady, like a predator stalking through the void. The Coalition dispatched a small reconnaissance fleet hoping to measure the threat, but even before reaching the ship, the scouts felt its presence. Sensors screamed with interference as if the vessel's very existence bent the laws of technology. The closer they drew, the colder space felt, and many swore they could feel eyes upon them even though no windows lit the surface of the giant craft. When they turned back, shaken and afraid, they reported what every commander dreaded to hear. The warship was not drifting. It was choosing its path. It was heading straight for them in every system of the Coalition. The news spread like wildfire. Merchants abandoned their routes, colonies locked down their ports, and fleets rallied under urgent command. The great and proud Coalition, which once boasted of peace and superiority, trembled because of a single vessel. It was not just steel and cannons that terrified them. It was the weight of history. The shadow of humanity had returned, and with it came questions that no one dared answer. Why now? What drove this silent ship to emerge after so long? The galaxy waited, but the warship did not pause. It kept coming. Memories of old wars in the high reaches of the Coalition homeworlds. The war councils gathered again, and this time, the atmosphere was far darker than before. What had once been disbelief turned to certainty, for the scouts had returned with undeniable proof. The warship approaching was human, and its design matched none of the modern fleets that the Coalition had catalogued across the centuries. It was ancient yet alive, a vessel carrying a weight of history heavier than any one system could bear. The younger races argued among themselves, insisting that humanity was only a legend built up by fear and exaggeration, but the elder species, silenced them with a single look, for they had seen humans with their own eyes in ages past and still bore the scars. Among the elders were the Karith, a long-lived reptilian race whose historians kept records spanning millennia. They spoke of the last human wars when fleets of iron and fire descended without hesitation and burned through coalition space like a storm. They recalled how human soldiers boarded enemy ships and fought until their bodies gave way, yet even in death they left scars that terrified entire legions. The Karith ambassador stood before the council, his scales trembling with age, and he reminded them that humans were not conquerors by need, but by choice, for when provoked, they unleashed war as if it were their truest language. The chamber grew, silent as he spoke of colonies that no longer existed, of planets scarred beyond healing, all done by human fleets that were smaller in number yet greater in spirit. And when the war ended, humanity did not sign treaties. They vanished, leaving behind only silence and the promise that they would one day return. The Veyari, a species of thinkers who prided themselves on logic, had long argued that humans were myths inflated by time, but even they faltered now as the data from the scouts replayed again and again. The sheer size of the ship, its impossible endurance, the deliberate course it held, none of it aligned with the idea of a forgotten relic. This ship had purpose, and purpose was the most dangerous weapon humanity ever wielded. The Veyari ministers began to whisper among themselves, not of doubt, but of fear. If this was only one ship, where were the others? And if there were no others, what kind of mission demanded that a single vessel return after centuries in the dark? Throughout the coalition worlds, ordinary citizens began to remember stories told by their ancestors. Farmers on distant colonies spoke of nights when their great-grandparents warned them never to underestimate the death-worlders called humans. Children grew restless as schools filled with rumors, and soldiers on patrol sharpened their weapons, though they knew that against a warship of such scale, their efforts would be like ants defying a storm. Entire fleets were redirected to border zones, but even as the ships assembled, the knowledge spread among them that numbers alone had never been enough to bring down humans before. What frightened the council most was not the warship itself, but the silence that surrounded it. In every past war, humans had shouted their intentions, declaring vengeance or swearing protection. They had spoken with voices full of fire that rallied both allies and enemies alike. But this ship spoke nothing. It only came forward as though no explanation was needed. That silence pressed heavier on the galaxy than any weapon could. It was the silence of inevitability, the silence of a predator that had already chosen its prey. In the archives of the Coalition, hidden from younger eyes, were sealed recordings from the last encounters with humanity. One such record was played, again in the chamber, a flickering image of a human commander standing among fire and wreckage, his uniform torn and his face bloodied, yet his voice steady as stone. He declared that humanity would never bow, that they would never forgive betrayal, and that one day when the galaxy least expected it, their warships would rise again. Those words, dismissed for generations, now echoed with haunting clarity because that promise had not been broken. The warship advancing through the stars was proof that humanity's memory was long and its reach unbroken. As the days passed and the warship drew closer, the coalition split in fear. Some argued that they should seek peace at once, send emissaries and beg for mercy before the ship reached them. Others demanded that fleets prepare to strike, to destroy the vessel before it reached populated space. But the elders knew that both choices carried equal danger, for humans had never respected weakness nor had they been deterred by strength. They respected only resolve. And even that was no shield. The debates turned into shouting. The council threatened to fracture, and yet through all of it the warship came on, steady and unstoppable, as though the very stars themselves were bending to its will. The first encounter. The coalition could not wait any longer. As the human warship moved deeper into their borders, a decision was forced upon them. A fleet of interceptors was sent, not to destroy the vessel, but to meet it, to demand its purpose, and to test whether the legends of human war machines still held any truth. Hundreds of ships gathered at the edge of the sector, their formation tight and their weapons charged, though they told themselves this was only precaution. Soldiers aboard those ships tried to calm their hearts, but every one of them felt the Same cold dread, for they knew the stories and they feared this might be the day the galaxy learned those stories had been true all along. The warship appeared before them with no fanfare. It drifted into sensor range, massive and unyielding, its dark metal hull marked with the scars of countless battles fought centuries ago. The Coalition fleet initiated a standard hail, their voices translated across frequencies in every known language, demanding identification and intent. They expected silence, but what they received shook them more deeply. The warship responded not with words, but with a scan. It was not the simple sweep of information that any vessel could use, but a penetrating gaze that cut through shields and armor as though they were nothing. Every captain felt as if the warship was looking into their very souls, measuring them, judging them, dismissing them. Lights flickered across the fleet, systems shuddered, and entire crews cried out in fear as the alien technology they trusted began to falter under the scrutiny of that human vessel. When the scan ended, silence returned, and in that silence every alien heart pounded louder than cannon fire. No shots were fired, no threats were made, yet the Coalition commanders realized that the warship had just proved a truth far more dangerous. It had shown them that it could end them at will, and it had chosen not to. That restraint was more terrifying than any weapon. One of the younger captains, desperate to prove his courage, broke formation and surged forward. His ship fired warning shots across the bow of the warship, bright energy bolts flashing against the endless black. The Coalition officers shouted at him to stand down, but his pride was stronger than his fear. What happened next became legend. The human warship did not turn its massive guns, nor did it launch fighters. It simply released a wave of pressure, invisible to sensors yet felt in every mind. The attacking vessel froze mid-flight, every system dead, its hull groaning under unseen stress. Then just as suddenly the pressure lifted, and the disabled ship drifted helplessly back into formation. The message was clear. The warship did not need to fight them to win. It had already won by existing fear spread through the fleet. Veterans whispered that they had seen this before, that humans had always wielded not only weapons of steel but weapons of will, breaking armies without firing a shot. The youngest among them struggled to breathe, realizing that their technology, which they believed unmatched, was little more than fragile glass before the iron of humanity. Yet still the warship spoke nothing. No demands, no warnings, only silence. And that silence roared louder than any declaration. When the Coalition fleet retreated to report their findings, they carried with them more than data. They carried the crushing weight of certainty. The human warship was real, it was awake, and it was not drifting without aim. It was coming deeper, step by step, through the galaxy they had built in humanity's absence. The Council, when they heard the report, sat in stunned silence. The younger races could no longer deny the truth, for even the bravest of their fleets had been brought to their knees without a single shot exchanged. The elders bowed their heads, for they knew that what was to come could not be stopped. Humanity had returned, and its first encounter was not an attack but a reminder. The galaxy remembered what it had chosen to forget. Humanity revealed. The Coalition Council had been waiting for days with unease, spreading like fire among their worlds when the human warship finally broke its silence. At first it came as a faint transmission on an old frequency, one long abandoned by the Coalition fleets because it was believed to belong only to history. The signal cut through their systems with clarity, carrying a voice that was unmistakably human. It was deep and steady, the kind of voice that carried no fear and no hesitation. The words translated into every tongue across the chamber, and they rang like thunder. Humanity had returned. The commander introduced himself, not with titles of nobility or the grand flair of diplomacy, but with simple strength. He declared that the warship was awake because the galaxy was in danger once again, that humanity had not vanished into silence, but had gone into exile waiting for the time when it would be needed. That time, he said, had now come. The Council members listened in frozen horror, for the human spoke as if centuries had not passed, as if humanity had simply paused the clock and stepped back into the game of stars. He did not threaten them directly, but every sentence carried a weight of warning. He told them that the galaxy had grown complacent, that they had built empires upon fragile peace while shadows stirred in the dark. He reminded them that humanity had always been the wall that stood when others fell, and that the warship he commanded was not here to negotiate, but to test the strength of those who claimed to rule. The silence after his final words felt heavier than the message itself. The commander had not promised war, but he had promised reckoning. Across the galaxy the transmission echoed, carried by traitors, spies, and frightened refugees. For the first time in centuries, the people of the coalition heard a human voice, and it unsettled them in ways they could not describe. Soldiers sharpened their blades, though they knew blades would be useless. Children whispered in awe, and elders shivered, with memories of battles fought long ago. Some argued that perhaps the humans had returned as allies, that maybe this was not a threat but a desperate warning. Others were certain that humanity was preparing to reclaim what it had lost. Either way, the galaxy understood that its balance had been broken on the border fleets. Captains replayed the voice of the commander again and again. There was something in it that pierced through fear and replaced it with an unwilling respect. Humanity had always spoken with conviction, and even those who hated them had listened. This warship was not just metal and weapons, it was a symbol. It was a reminder that while other species measured progress by centuries of peace, humans measured survival by centuries of struggle. The very presence of the vessel reignited the old question that many had buried. What role did humanity truly hold in the galaxy? Were they destroyers, or were they guardians forced into fire by fate, the coalition? Leadership divided once more. Some pressed for immediate surrender, believing that if they opened their gates and swore loyalty, humanity might spare them. Others demanded a grand offensive, a strike to prove that the galaxy had moved beyond its fear of Earth. But no matter how they argued, all of them felt the same truth pulsing in their minds. The galaxy had not been ready for the return of humanity. No fleet, no council, no treaty could soften the blow of that revelation. The commander had spoken only once, and yet the galaxy now trembled under the weight of it, far beyond the eyes of the council. On colonies far removed from the halls of power, whispers turned into movements. There were those who saw in the human voice not a threat but a beacon. Species long oppressed by the coalition began to wonder if humanity's return could mean freedom. They remembered that humans had never bowed easily and never tolerated chains. If humanity was awake again, perhaps the galaxy's rulers would not hold their thrones for long. And in the endless dark, the warship continued its march, silent once more after its single transmission, a leviathan of steel carrying the promise of fire. The galaxy had asked for answers, and humanity had given only a warning. The real truth was yet to come, the clash of fleets. The decision finally came when the coalition realized that waiting would only tighten the noose around their necks. They would not allow the human warship to march deeper without resistance. Grand Fleet was assembled, the largest in centuries, composed of thousands of ships drawn from every corner of the coalition. Carriers launched squadrons of interceptors, cruisers aligned in flawless formations, and battleships prepared their main cannons. The council called it the Dawn Shield, a wall of unity that no single vessel could overcome. Pride was their weapon, fear was their fuel, and yet even as they prepared to engage, doubt gnawed at every soul. For they knew they were not facing just a ship, they were facing history itself. The encounter unfolded on the edge of a dying star, its light dim and red, casting long shadows across the battlefield. The coalition fleet filled the void like a storm, their signals overlapping into a web of coordination designed to crush any resistance. When the human warship arrived, it did not adjust course, it did not slow. It entered the battlefield as though the thousands of ships arrayed against it were nothing more than drifting debris. That defiance enraged the coalition admirals. With a single command, the first volley of energy lances tore through the void, a storm of fire converging upon the dark titan of humanity. The impacts shook space itself, light bursting in waves that blinded sensors. For a brief moment, some dared to believe they had succeeded, but when the light cleared, the warship still advanced. Its armor glowed from the burns, its hull groaned under pressure, but its engines roared on unbroken. Then it answered. The first shot from its main cannon was not a beam, but a spear of molten fury that cut through an enemy cruiser as though it were paper. In an instant, half of the coalition fleet understood that every story told about humanity had been true. The warship did not fight with numbers. It fought with ferocity that turned space itself into a battlefield of nightmares wave after wave. The coalition tried to overwhelm it. Fighters swarmed like insects only to vanish in bursts of flame as automated defenses cut them down. Battleships fired their largest weapons, only to watch them absorbed by shields that pulsed like living walls. The warship moved with purpose, never wasting energy. Each shot precise, each maneuver designed to break the rhythm of the enemy. Where the coalition sought order, the humans brought chaos, and in chaos they thrived. Entire wings of ships fell apart as panic spread, captains losing formation under the crushing realization that the enemy was not simply surviving, but dismantling them, one by one. The admirals shouted commands, demanding discipline, but fear spread faster than duty. Crews saw the warship carve through their allies and wondered how long it would be before their own turn came. More than the weapons, it was the aura of inevitability that shattered them. Every strike from the human vessel carried the weight of an ancient promise that no matter how many ships stood in its way, humanity would push forward. And with every passing moment, the dawn shield lost its shine. Still, the warship did not speak. Its silence was the loudest voice on the field. Where the coalition roared with commands and panicked cries, the humans answered with the cold language of war. Precision, devastation, inevitability. The battle that was meant to be a show of unity became a test of survival, and the coalition was failing. As ships broke formation and fled, as admirals struggled to hold together what remained, the truth spread from system to system faster than light. The dawn shield had fallen. The galaxy had thrown its might against a single human warship, and it had been humbled when the guns finally quieted and wreckage drifted across the void. The warship remained, scarred yet unbowed, its engines burning, brighter than ever. It did not chase the survivors. It did not declare victory. It simply resumed its course, moving deeper into coalition space, as if the greatest fleet in history had been nothing more than a delay. The coalition had sought to prove its strength, and instead it had proven the power of humanity. A legend had been reborn not in whispers but in fire, the hidden truth. The coalition was broken in spirit after the fall of the Dawn Shield. Worlds that had once looked to the Council for protection now whispered doubts in their marketplaces and homes. Fleets that had sworn unity now hesitated to follow orders, and commanders looked to the stars with dread rather than pride. The human warship had proven itself unstoppable, and yet the question that weighed heaviest on every mind was why. If humans had returned only for vengeance, the warship could have reduced colonies to ashes already. Instead, it pressed forward, leaving destruction only when challenged, never striking at the innocent. The Council feared that purpose more than it feared fire, for an enemy without reason could be fought, but an enemy with reason could not be dissuaded. It was then that the warship spoke again. The same voice of the human commander filled the channels, across the galaxy steady and cold, but this time it carried more than warning. He revealed what the Council had long forgotten, perhaps willfully buried in their archives. Beyond the stars where no empire dared to settle, something older than the coalition was stirring. It was an enemy that humans had once fought in secret, an enemy so ancient that it had no name in modern tongues, only whispers of shadows that consumed worlds and left nothing behind. The commander spoke of battles fought in the dark reaches of space where humanity bled not for conquest, but for survival of all life. They had not vanished into silence out of weakness, but had withdrawn to prepare, to hide, to wait for the moment when the enemy would rise again. That moment had now come. The revelation struck the Council like a storm. Many refused to believe, calling it manipulation meant to excuse human aggression. Others trembled with the weight of the truth, for in their archives were hints of ancient threats, sealed records of lost colonies that had vanished without explanation. The pieces of history they had dismissed as accidents or myths suddenly fit into the human commander's tale with chilling clarity. The coalition realized with horror that their peace had been built on ignorance, that while they squabbled and fought over borders, humanity had stood in the dark as the only shield. Against something far worse for ordinary citizens, the message spread like wildfire. On distant colonies, people listened to the human voice and felt something they had not expected. It was not only fear, but also hope. If humanity had fought such an enemy before and survived, perhaps their return meant salvation rather than doom. For the oppressed and the forgotten races within the coalition, the Warship was no longer a monster but a beacon. If the humans came not to conquer but to fight for the galaxy itself, then perhaps siding with them was not betrayal but survival. The admirals of the coalition were less convinced. To them, every human promise was a blade with two edges. Even if the threat was real, they asked, what would be left of the galaxy once humanity was done fighting it? Could they trust a species whose wars had nearly drowned the stars in fire? But as they debated, the Warship kept moving, its course unwavering, its message unchanged. Stand with humanity, or be swept aside when the true enemy arrived. The choice was simple yet unbearable. Resist and face certain destruction at human hands, or join and face a darkness older than memory. In the quiet after the message ended, one truth spread across every system. Humanity had not returned as conquerors. They had returned as guardians awakened from slumber, carrying scars of battles the galaxy had never known. Whether the coalition believed them or not, no longer mattered. The Warship moved forward, and behind its silence lay a truth that would soon reveal itself in fire and blood. The galaxy had demanded answers, and humanity had given them. Now it was time for the stars to decide whether they would follow or fall, the final stand. The galaxy held its breath as the human warship pressed onward, its path leading into the dark regions beyond the coalition's furthest borders. There, where maps ended and silence reigned, the truth revealed itself. From the void emerged shapes that had not been seen in living memory, creatures of shadow and steel, vast and endless, their presence blotting out the stars. They were the ancient enemy spoken of in whispers, the hunger that consumed worlds. Their arrival shattered all doubt. Humanity had not lied. The darkness was real, and it had returned. The coalition fleets trembled as their sensors filled with readings that no mind could accept. Thousands of enemy vessels, organic and metallic, swarmed like predators in the night. Their weapons were not beams or cannons, but corrosive storms of energy that shredded shields and tore apart hulls. The first coalition squadrons sent to engage were ripped apart within moments, their screams echoing across the channels. Panic spread as admirals realized that their vast fleets, which had been assembled against the humans, were now hopelessly outmatched against this ancient foe. It was in that moment of despair that the human warship surged forward. Alone, it charged into the swarm, its massive guns firing with unrelenting fury. Each blast cut through the enemy, tearing holes in their formations. Drones poured from its hangars, swarming like a cloud of steel birds, intercepting attacks and striking weak points with surgical precision. The galaxy watched in awe as one ship fought with the ferocity of an entire armada. And for the first time, coalition soldiers felt something stir in their hearts. It was not fear, but courage. If humanity could stand against this storm, perhaps they too could fight. The call went out, not from the council, but from the common captains on the line. Ships began to rally behind the warship, forming a wall of fire around it. Species that had distrusted each other for centuries now fought side by side, following the human commander's lead. The battle raged like nothing the galaxy had ever seen. Enemy vessels fell in burning fragments, but so too did coalition ships, sacrificing themselves to hold the line. Through it all, the human warship remained at the center, bleeding fire from its wounds yet refusing to fall. As the battle reached its peak, the enemy unleashed its largest creation, a leviathan of shadow that dwarfed even the human warship. Its presence darkened the battlefield, its roar shaking the very fabric of space. The coalition faltered, but the human commander's voice cut through the terror, steady and fierce. He declared that humanity had not returned to conquer but to protect, and that even if every star burned out, They would fight until nothing remained. With those words, the warship charged the Leviathan head-on. Cannons fired in a storm, missiles streaked across the void, and finally, with one last desperate strike, the human vessel unleashed its core in a blaze of light that shattered the darkness. When the glare faded, silence fell. The Leviathan was gone, its body torn apart, and the enemy swarm was breaking, retreating back into the void from which it had come. But the human warship was gone too, reduced to drifting wreckage, its great heart extinguished in sacrifice. Across the galaxy, fleets and colonies alike stood in silence, their eyes fixed on the place where the warship had made its final stand. The coalition had survived, not by its own power, but because humanity had chosen to return, to fight, and to fall so others might live. The story spread faster than light. Every world, every colony, every child heard of the human warship that stood alone against the dark. It was no longer legend. It was truth. The coalition understood that humanity was not a myth to be dismissed, nor a threat to be feared, but a force of nature that even the stars respected. And though the warship was gone, the galaxy knew this was not the end. For if humanity could return once, they could return again. And when they did, the galaxy would remember not fear but hope. In the silence that followed, one truth echoed across the stars. Humanity had fought not for conquest, not for revenge, but for survival of all. And in their sacrifice, they had reminded the galaxy of what it meant to stand unbroken, the warship's legacy. The galaxy had never known silence like the silence that followed the great battle. Wreckage drifted through the void, fragments of ships both alien and coalition, glowing faintly against the endless dark. At the heart of it all floated the broken frame of the human warship, its once roaring engines now quiet, its guns stilled, its proud form scarred beyond recognition. Yet even in ruin the vessel did not appear defeated. To those who looked upon it from afar it stood like a monument, a reminder that humanity had returned not as conquerors but as protectors, not to claim dominion, but to prove once more that they would bleed so others might live. The coalition survivors gathered their fleets and carried the story across the stars. On every world, from the richest core planet to the poorest mining outpost, the tale was told of how a single ship of humanity had stood against the ancient darkness. Parents told it to their children, commanders told it to their soldiers, even priests and scholars spoke of it with reverence. It was no longer a warning of fear, but a spark of hope. For the galaxy understood now that humanity had never abandoned them. They had been waiting in silence, holding back an enemy too terrible for others to even name, and when the time came, they had risen to fight again without hesitation. Across the coalition, old rivalries began to falter. Species that had distrusted one another for generations found themselves bound by the memory of the warship's stand. They spoke of rebuilding fleets not as tools of pride, but as shields to defend against the shadows that still lurked in the void. And though no human voice was heard again, the echo of the commander's words lived on in every heart, a steady reminder that resolve mattered more than fear, and that unity mattered more than pride. Many asked if humanity would return again. Some whispered that other warships still slept in the far reaches of the stars, hidden and waiting for the day when the galaxy would once more need them. Others believed that the sacrifice of the lone ship was final, and that the humans had given all they had left. Yet no matter which belief they held, none could deny the truth that humanity had carved into the stars. They were not myths. They were not forgotten. They were warriors who endured beyond time itself. The galaxy was forever changed, not by conquest, but by sacrifice. And as the stars turned above, a promise lingered in the silence. If the darkness ever rose again, if the galaxy once more cried out for salvation, humanity would answer. Whether in flesh and blood or in steel and fire, they would return, for that was their nature, to rise when others fell and to stand when all else crumbled. The wreckage of the warship drifted on, but to those who gazed upon it, it was no ruin. It was a beacon, a reminder, a vow written across the void that humanity was eternal in spirit even if the vessel was gone. And so the galaxy whispered one truth that would be remembered for ages to come. Humanity had returned, and in their return, They had given everything the end.